Welcome back to my channel. My name is Olive. So slightly different video today. I was asked quite a lot by you lovely humans in one of my previous videos about sharing my experience of why I'm no longer vegan. So without further ado, we are going to delve into this journey. Just as a little PSA, I just wanted to say that this is based on my own personal experiences with the vegan diet and sort of the lifestyle, the culture around it. I don't inherently have any issues with people who are vegan or in fact follow their own diets. Everyone is entitled to do whatever they want to. But I just thought I would shed some light on my experiences and maybe give you some kind of different perspectives. So let's rewind all the way back to October 2014. That was the kind of month that I decided to go vegan. A little bit of a backstory to this. In the April of 2014, I had started looking a little bit more into health and fitness and nutrition. I had started slowly cutting out dairy products as I found myself to be quite intolerant to it. And over the course of the next few months, I ended up cutting out red meat. I ended up cutting out chicken, eggs. Eventually, I was pescatarian for about a month, and then I went fully into vegan. This coincided though with an eating disorder. It was a mixture of anorexia and also orthorexia, alongside consistent and repetitive and obsessive exercise and training. So there was a whole host of crazy things going on for my body at this point of time. So I was initially influenced to go vegan because for me it was almost a way to mask my eating disorder. You know, by having the label vegan, no one could really question why I was only eating a bowl of vegetables for dinner. It was oh, she's just vegan, that's what she eats because that's what's available. At the time, it's worth noting that I was at halls in university and we had a dining hall, so there were obviously vegetarian options, there weren't tons of vegan options, so I went with what I had. But yeah, basically it was a chance for me to kind of mask my eating disorder and have no real questions, and I could just crack on with it. At this point, I would meticulously track not only my exercise, but my food intake as well. And as a result, there was a really sharp decline in my weight quite quickly after going vegan. So for reference, right now I am 5'2". I have been 5'2" since I was 14. I've not grown in 10 years. But I'm about 57 kilos and I'm a healthy, strong kind of weight. For reference, when I was at my lowest weight in October of 2014, I had dropped down to 39 kilos. So incredibly low weight. I was next to nothing. I was never hospitalized from it because I could kind of cover it up. It was wintertime in England. I used to wear a load of baggy jumpers and everyone had always just seen me as this very slight, small girl. So there were no real concerns from my new friends at university. When I started slowly cutting out all these different food groups, I had started my Instagram page, which is what it is now, Yoga with Olive, but that started as a vegan kind of food share. So I would take photos of my food and share that, and every now and then maybe a yoga pose. But also at this time I had started following a bunch of different vegan food bloggers, and of course they always made their food so beautiful that you were yeah, of course, it looks like such an aesthetic. I also started watching on YouTube these two people, Freely the Banana Girl and Durian Rider. Now these guys were interesting because they were high carb, low fat, which meant that what they would usually do is eat a mono meal of either all bananas covered in coconut sugar, or they would eat a whole watermelon, or they would have bananas and rice or potatoes or whatever. So it was very simple kind of food. It was these heavy carb based fruits, veggies and grains, and that's all they would kind of eat and live on. And you would look at them and they were very lean people. You could see the muscle definition, but at the time my judgment wasn't great. Looking back at them now, they are a little bit unhealthy in terms of perhaps their mentality and approach towards eating. I think it is disordered eating. Now, this is just my opinion. Feel free to argue with me if you want to. But yeah, it wasn't a healthy way. But the dangerous thing was that they had such an influence over me and probably a couple hundred other people as well, maybe thousands, I don't know. But as a result, I was like, yeah, I can try high carb, low fat. This is when I, started refeeding myself after losing so much weight. I was like, yeah, high carb, low fat. And I was just like, yep, smashing down bowls and bowls of rice, as many fruits and veg as possible, because I thought that's what my body needed. Responded very differently to what Freely said it would do. She was like, yeah, you would like shed all the water weight, you would shed all this like body fat, and you would look super, super healthy. Nope. I just continued to put on more and more water weight, and body dysmorphia skyrocketed. And I remember seeing in the comment section, people were like, yeah, I just feel like I'm, increasing in weight and it's not doing anything. And she was like, don't worry, by week 6, it will just fall away. Body doesn't work like that, hun. And my point of kind of sharing this story, because I didn't have the awareness and the knowledge at the time to really look past this bullshit, I took it as gospel. And that's really, really dangerous when people who are not nutritionalists are starting to share this information that can be so harmful to individuals. Luckily now, I think the vegan sort of movement and people who are vegan food bloggers know a little bit more, and they're actually sharing really creative and really nutritionally dense vegan food. But back in the day, that was not the case at all. Another little point. It's worth noting as well that all of sort of like these high carb, low fat diets really perpetuate diet culture, and they also are very heavily fat shaming people, because it's all about losing all your body fat and being super lean and toned all the time, and it's really perpetuating this one standard of beauty, which is slim. And that's so, so harmful, because that body shape is not attainable for everyone in the entire world, due to our genetics, due to our culture, due to our bone, our muscle mass, whatever it is. So there are so many inherent issues with this, but it was so hard to see through as well. And I mean, you even have to just look at me for an example of this, right? I came into veganism because it was a way to mask my eating disorder and shed the weight without asking any questions. And I feel like a lot of people who have come into veganism have come into it for that kind of reason as well, because it's almost like this promise from these bigger names in the community of being like, yeah, you'll slim down, it's all fine, it's all healthy, you'll do this naturally, and you'll only eat plants and you'll save the planet in the process. And it's this guilt tripping as well. It's sort of calling everyone who eats animal products murderers, and it's this real like shock to the system, like, oh well, I don't want to be. And yeah, it's a savior mentality, which is very, very tricky to navigate, and it's just a difficult kind of conversation, and you can only really have this conversation with people who are willing to be receptive and open to hearing your perspective. Even if they're vegan or not, it doesn't matter, but I think it's a conversation still worth having. Sort of like going forwards a little bit, when it came to that Christmas in December 2014, my parents obviously had some talks with me and said, like, look, Olive, we're very concerned about you. You've dropped so much weight. You're not looking after yourself. Your hair has like thinned down so much. They were at this point living back home in Dubai. I was in the UK, so there was such a huge distance between us, and I could see how much it was hurting them. So I made the conscious decision to start trying to eat a little bit more nutritionally dense food, but I was still very stubborn and I still wanted to stay vegan. So over the course of the next couple of months, after year one at uni finished, I had started to put the weight back on. But it obviously starts to come back in very odd ways. There was a lot of water retention, there was a lot of bloating, my gut wasn't very happy with how things were moving with the vegan diet and with refeeding, if you want to call it that way, and just bringing my weight back up to normal. It was a really uncomfortable time and didn't really help with like my body dysmorphia. It sort of like peaked that even more, and I had to keep catching myself not wanting to slip back into old habits of restriction, but that's very, very challenging to do, especially on a vegan diet. And then towards September 2015, I met my boyfriend at the time, and him along with his entire family were brought up vegetarian, and a lot of them were then transitioning to be vegan. And I don't just mean his immediate family, his wider family as well. So I was heavily influenced by him to stay vegan, but despite that relationship being awful in so many ways and very toxic, what I was shown was that there were better ways to eat vegan diets and have it a bit more nutritionally dense and have whole foods, because like I said, they were vegetarian their whole lives. They knew how to do it. So from this respect, I started eating a little bit healthier. My veganism then stepped away from being a restrictive diet and then started to turn more towards the ethics and the activism side of it as well. So during this time, I went to a bunch of like Veg Fests. I think I went to Veg Fest Bristol like 2 years in a row. I went to some in Brighton. I went to different ones in Exeter, in Worthing, and just started to immerse myself in this vegan culture, if that's what you want to say, and sort of see the more commercial side of it. It was very exciting. It was quite cool to like be a part of it and almost have a part of my identity tied to these different components as well. It felt very like fulfilling at the time. I was very lost in who I was, but this was something that I could attach my identity to. So yeah, like I said before, at this time I had started looking more at the activism side of the vegan diet and why you would follow it, looking into the egg, looking into the farming, looking into the dairy industry. And there are definitely good ways to go about being an activist, but I didn't take that approach. I was, for lack of a better words, a really horrible person when it came to this. So again, heavily influenced by my boyfriend at the time. He was a very, very like upfront, open, in your face kind of activist vegan. And I behaved like that towards my housemates at uni who I really, really cared about, who weren't vegan. And even to my parents had never, and my brother, they had never ever been vegetarian. And suddenly I was like hounding them with all this kind of like, oh, this is bad, this is terrible, don't you see what you're doing? And it was obviously met with affront. They were like really defensive about it because I was not going about it in the nice and correct and informing kind of way. I was just directly blaming them for still eating animal products, which is not what I wanted to do. And as a result, I did start to push these relationships further and further away from me and from them. And it did feel really, really isolating at the time. So yeah, there was a real kind of superiority that my boyfriend at the time had over other people just because of being vegan, and that, yeah, very indirectly influenced me, which I can now look back and understand, but at the time I didn't really see where I was coming from, or I didn't want to understand my mum's points or my housemates' points as to why I was being such an asshole. So kind of leading on from that, when I went away on holiday with my family, we would usually go to different places like in Europe, and usually places at this time who didn't really know what veganism was. It was still a very, very new kind of concept. Things in England had only just started catching up. There were more like fake meat products or more alternative milks, but places in Europe, I think we went to Malta, and I was always so grumpy because I was hungry all the time, and the meals that I would get would be like spaghetti with olive oil and some olives like chucked on top, because they didn't understand what veganism was. And I don't blame them at all for it. When you suddenly say, yeah, no dairy, no meat, no fish, no nothing, it's like, well, what do we provide? So I would get that, and then I would be grumpy the entire time I was with my family because I was constantly hungry. All I could really eat was fruit and vegetables and probably bread and hummus. And I was just an absolute nightmare to be around. And then even when it came to going out to restaurants with friends at university, I was still that really awkward person who'd be like, yeah, but can you please make sure there's none of this and none of this and none of this in there? Kind of really not trusting the waiters and the waitresses to relay the information back to the kitchen staff. And I just felt like no one really wanted to go out with me because I was so difficult. And looking back, I do understand why. So it's kind of important to note, when I was vegan, I never felt satiated. So, for example, for more context, now listen to how ridiculous this is. Every morning I would have a bowl of porridge that weighed 100 grams. I would put whatever milk I wanted to, the alternative milk. Then I would have a whole banana on top, a whole scoop, proper scoop of peanut butter. I'd have 2 dates on it as well, and loads of maple syrup. Now this is a big bowl. Imagine me, a 5'2", 50-kilo girl, eating this massive bowl. An hour later I would be hungry. An hour later I would be reaching for snacks. And that was me the whole time I was vegan. I was constantly grazing, constantly eating something. And my meals, my breakfast, my lunch, my dinner, it was huge. They were all such big calorie dense meals, yet I was never satiated. So I was always having to constantly graze. And then during this time, I also ended up getting the contraceptive implant in my arm. It was a way for birth control, obviously, and the reason that I chose it was because all the other alternatives either sounded way too invasive, like the coil, and the pill had lactose in it, and I didn't want to take that because it wasn't vegan friendly, and this was the most vegan friendly option that I had. So the way that it worked, it was like a slow release of certain hormones. I can't remember exactly which ones it was, but it really messed me up, and I think that if I was on a normal diet, the effects wouldn't have been so severe. So what had happened was I would lose my period for 2 months, say, and then it would come back for 3 weeks, and I'd be bleeding for 3 weeks, and then again it would disappear, and then again it would come back for such a long time with a vengeance, and it was so up and down. And as a result of losing so much blood, I became so severely anemic, so I had a real strong iron deficiency. And I think as well, when I was vegan, I wasn't correctly supplementing, I wasn't getting enough sort of protein and nutrients and vitamins that I needed to. So as a result, it was awful. I think I asked my GP student, Sina, this yesterday. I said to her, she asked me, what were your levels when you got tested for anemia? And I said, well, my number was 7. And she looked at me and she said, well, Olive, you should have been put on an intravenous drip straight away. I wasn't told this at the time. Obviously, it was so severe. I was given super strong medication to help my iron levels come back up and to bring me out of being anemic. So if you don't know what the effects of anemia are, I would wake up severely tired despite having 8-9 hours of sleep. I would have brain fog, I would have fatigue, I felt aches and pains, I felt cold all the time, even when it was warm outside. I just felt so lethargic, and this came at the worst point ever because I was studying for my final year exams. I was trying to finish my dissertation at uni, so the months that really counted, this is when it all hit. And my point of telling this is because I feel like if I wasn't vegan, if I had a normal diet, I don't feel like the effects would have been as severe as what they were. So that was a bit crap. So kind of fast forwarding, that happened mid-2017. I then ended up breaking up with that boyfriend of mine for a variety of different reasons, and thank God I did. But because I broke up with him, I then felt like I could start to step away from veganism. I felt like he had a bunch of ties over me in terms of who I was and controlled a lot of what I did. And during the time I was actually with him, I used to regularly have dreams about eating meat, and I would feel so guilty about them. I couldn't even bring myself to tell him about it. But it's so funny because looking back now, I just feel like my body was trying to tell me something like, Olive, you just need to eat a little bit of meat to feel a little bit better. And I eventually listened to those cravings. I started eating animal products again in September of 2018. It started with salmon. Salmon was the absolute favourite food of mine. It was one of the last things I ate before being vegan, and that was the first thing I ate again. And whilst I was cooking it, it was really odd. I was like a little bit cautious. I didn't know how I was going to react, but that first mouthful, it was honestly like my cells felt rejuvenated. You know, like the first sip of water you take in the morning, you're like, oh my God, happy dance for my cells. It felt like that, but eating the salmon. And it felt so good. The guilt that I thought I would feel, it wasn't there because my body felt so good in how it responded. And over the next course of a few months, I started introducing other foods. So I started having more eggs, I had a little bit more fish, eventually it was chicken, eventually it was dairy, and then eventually it was red meat. So it was a slow introduction. And I know a lot of my friends who are vegan like always question like, yeah, but how did your gut respond? And honestly, it was absolutely fine. I had no gut problems at all because I grew up 18 years of my life eating meat, so it was a very natural kind of return. So there were loads of like nutritious gaps that I was starting to feel once I had slowly started reintroducing animal products, and I could feel myself finally being satiated after a meal after 4 years of never feeling full, which was so important for me because I had just started the world of being a yoga teacher and a self-employed one at that. So I was really trying to get my business to grow. This was very early on. I think it was less than 6 months into this kind of new era of my teaching. And I found myself, when I was vegan at least, I would spend breakfast, lunch and dinner in the kitchen cooking and wasting so much time when that valuable time could have been spent growing my business. So when I started introducing animal products again, I found that I didn't have to spend so much of that valuable time in the kitchen anymore. I could actually go out and spend more time teaching or having meetings or creating content or working on my classes. And I suddenly had so much more free time. And not only that, but I had so much more energy to teach as well. I wouldn't have to panic and shove like a banana or a fruit and nut bar down my throat before I teach or after I taught, because it was absolutely fine. There wasn't any of this like panic eating before or after I taught, because it was all good. I was satiated now. And one of the main reasons why I think I returned to eating animal products was because even though I had physically recovered from the eating disorder of anorexia and orthorexia, as in my body was back to its normal healthy weight, psychologically I hadn't recovered from that. Psychologically, veganism is what tied me to the eating disorder. Inherently, it's still a very restrictive diet, so in that sense, I was still tied down to that mentality. I still felt guilty if I thought about eating something else that wasn't vegan, and I didn't want to feel that guilt anymore over food. It consumed so much of my time and my energy, and I just didn't want to give it any more fuel for the fire. So yeah, just to kind of summarize, veganism tied me to this very unhealthy relationship with my food, so that when I stepped away from that, it was like the mask had been lifted over my eyes, or off my eyes, I should say. I was suddenly like, oh my God, I don't have to restrict myself anymore. And slowly over the next couple of months, my relationship with food started healing, and I was eating foods that I really enjoyed and brought me so much joy into my soul, and it felt, yeah, very, very nurturing. So I guess, like, to kind of tie all of this in, the benefits that I have felt since coming back to a more like quote unquote normal diet where I'm consuming animal products again is that, okay, physically I feel the strongest I ever have. My recovery from my training is now very quick. I feel satiated after meals. I don't have to constantly graze. I don't have to waste so much time in the kitchen anymore. My hair is growing back. It got so thin right at the start in 2014. My hair used to be so thick and so long, and I lost loads of it because of being vegan and restricting my food and my iron. So it was an amalgamation of different variables. But it's finally starting to come back to a healthier sort of phase. I no longer look grey and tired and weak. I no longer get super cold hands and feet. Like, my circulation is so much better. But more looking at the social factors, I'm good friends with my uni housemates that I used to like scold for not being vegan, and we can have normal conversations now without me judging them. My relationship with my family, with my parents, with my brother has improved so much more because I can now sit and have a home-cooked meal with them. We can go out and not worry about pleasing the difficult person, me. We can go abroad if we wanted to and, you know, not worry about all these kinds of things. They don't have to tiptoe around me anymore because I'm moody, because I haven't eaten something in the last hour. And another thing is my cycles are regular. So granted, I did take the implant out in April of 2018. And my cycles have started to improve again. They are now more regular. They are monthly. I can predict when they come along. And I think as well that has helped since, you know, obviously taking out the implant and not being vegan anymore, but they're more predictable. Yeah, and another sort of physiological thing is that I don't feel bloated anymore. I don't feel like I'm holding on to so much water weight. Because if you think about it, the majority of food you are consuming when you are vegan are carbs. You have carbs in fruit, you have carbs in veg, you have it in bread, pasta, rice, or whatever. And carbs naturally hold on to so much more water than, say, protein or fat. And as a result, I'm not holding on to so much water anymore because I have more of a balanced diet in terms of the other food groups. And that's helped exponentially with my body dysmorphia as well. I no longer see myself as this like balloon individual. And obviously there are different phases in your cycle as a woman where you will hold on to more water, and that's fine. I have that understanding now, but it's not constant anymore. Before I kind of touch on the pitfalls of veganism just a little bit more, I did just want to say, like, it did connect me to some wonderful people who I am still very, very close to because we were both vegan at the time. You know, and there are some incredible foods and restaurants that you can have whilst being vegan. And I did enjoy it at the time, but I think as well, I was young, I was maybe a little bit misguided, I wasn't listening to advice from people, I was very, very stubborn. And one of the biggest sort of criticisms I have of the vegan community, now I don't know whether this is just mine or whether it's like quite a common thing, I don't know. But when I came out as not being vegan, I think I held it in for about 6 months. I put it on my story and basically said like, yo, look, I've been eating animal products because I felt like my body needed it and I've been feeling really good and I just wanted to share this information with you guys. The vast majority of responses I got that were positive were from very understanding people who weren't vegan. They were like, okay, good for you. Well done for listening to your body, listening to what you needed. My good close friends who are vegan, they responded again really positively. But the overwhelming responses that were negative that I got were all from vegans that I thought I was quite close to and who were my good understanding friends. And a lot of them just couldn't conceptualize why I had now turned my back on them and started to eat animal products. It was almost as if I was doing a disservice to them. And I got some real hate for it, and it really confused me because the vegan lifestyle, the vegan diet really promotes this culture of sharing and expressing compassion to all living beings. Now, when I got hate from people, that was so insanely hypocritical because I was like, well, look, you can't even express compassion towards me. And that just sat with me so funny, and I couldn't be bothered to waste any more of my time because I clearly didn't want to listen. And I know where that comes from. It's because veganism is so intrinsically linked to people's forms of identity and sense of self. That becomes very dangerous when you then start to challenge that identity because it's challenging their values as well. So it almost feels like a personal attack. So I feel like a lot of people do sort of link their whole sense of self towards veganism, which is very, very dangerous. That's why you have guilt when you start to step away from veganism, which is what I experienced, and which is why it can be then matched with this like adversity when you come away from that kind of identity. So whilst, yes, it can be such a loving, beautiful community who creates enjoyable products, who create VegFest and all of this, there are definitely ugly sides to it. And that doesn't just go for the vegan community. I mean, it's probably rife in everything, right? There are definitely polarities. But yeah, it was especially sort of like harrowing to experience. And I was like, oh, okay, this is quite shocking to be on the receiving end of. So yes, very, very interesting. That was what sort of pushed me away even further. Even though I do obviously now consume animal products, I do try to be mindful with where it comes from. I'm lucky that I live in Brighton. We have a lot of local resources available to us, so I will go and try get local animal products if possible. But this is a wider issue within the food industry, as we know. Whilst there are inherent problems that need to be fixed with the egg, with the dairy, with the farming industry in terms of animal welfare, there are also problems on the other end of the spectrum when it comes to production of like vegan food, for example. Almonds. place that they're farmed is in California. Where do we get the most amount of droughts and forest fires? California, because there is so much water required in the production of almond milk that it has started droughting California. So it's like you've got to look at it from both ends. Just because you're vegan doesn't mean that you're saving the planet. So you kind of have to remove this savior mentality and remove this superiority over other people. I think as a whole unified world, we can all be more conscious about what we consume, but there are obviously socio-political, economic, environmental factors within all of this. So it's more about the food industry changing itself, how the products are manufactured, less plastic, less water where possible. It's not the fact that veganism is going to save the planet at all. I don't think that's the answer at all. Feel free to argue with me, but this is my perspective after being in this world for a very long time. At the end of the day, veganism didn't work for me. Perhaps you could say, yes, you did it wrong, you might try it now and you might really enjoy it, but that's not the point. I've been there, I've done that. I'm now in a much better place with myself, with my eating, and to be honest, that's all that should really matter. So this is me saying, if you are vegan and you have been considering maybe consuming animal products again, this is your okay to do that. Please feel free to go ahead. I am here to support you if you want to reach out, if you feel like you need someone to talk to, because I have been there, I have done that. And if you're vegan and you're happy, then good for you. Go and thrive on that diet, because so many people can. And if you aren't vegan and you're just doing your own thing with your food, then as long as you're enjoying it and you're eating well for your body and you're sustaining yourself, good for you as well. So yes, this is me signing out. Thank you for listening this far. Comments, questions, queries, whatever, leave them below, and I'll see you next time.